I've donated more to this institution than you will earn in your entire career." His voice was low, precise, the kind of voice that had never once needed to raise itself because the world had always leaned in to listen. "And yet here you are," he continued, his eyes dropping, slowly, deliberately, to her stomach, "barely managing yourself, let alone my care." The corridor went still, not the kind of still that happens when nothing is occurring, the kind that happens when something so wrong has entered a space that the air itself does not know how to respond. Lena Vasquez did not flinch. She did not step back. She stood in the middle of that hospital corridor, 8 months pregnant, 12 hours into a shift that had already taken everything she had, and she looked at Rowan Ashford the way you look at something you have already decided not to be destroyed by. And then his hand moved. Not a strike. Something almost worse than that. He reached past her, dismissively, the way you reach past furniture, and his fingers closed around her wrist. Not tight, just certain, just the absolute, unquestioned assumption that she would yield. She felt every person on that floor stop breathing. She looked down at his hand. Then she looked up at his face. "Let go," she said, quietly, no trembling, no performance, just 2 words carrying the full weight of everything she was. He let go. But what he did not know, what none of them ever know about women like Lena, in corridors like this one, in cities like this, is that some names carry consequences that have nothing to do with a hospital badge. And somewhere across this city, at that exact moment, a phone was ringing. Have you ever worked yourself completely to the bone, poured every piece of yourself into something, built a life with your own 2 hands from nothing, and still been made to feel like you were invisible? Like your presence in the room was an inconvenience rather than a gift? If that has ever happened to you, then what you are about to watch is going to reach into your chest and squeeze something you forgot was there. Stay with me, because this story does not end where you think it does. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you have ever been underestimated, if someone has ever looked at you and seen less than you were, drop a comment below and tell me about it. And while you are there, hit that like button, because this story deserves to be seen, and you sharing it today might be exactly what someone else needs. Now let us go back to the beginning. The 7th floor of Meridian General Hospital never truly rested. Even in the deepest part of the night, when the rest of the building had settled into something resembling quiet, the surgical recovery ward hummed with its own particular urgency. Monitors whispered their steady reports. 4 bags made their slow, careful confessions into veins that had been through too much. The fluorescent lights above never dimmed. Not for night, not for exhaustion, not for anything. Lena Vasquez had learned, over 6 years, to find comfort in that constancy. She was 34 years old, 8 months pregnant, and still, without question, the most capable person on her floor. Not because no one else was talented. There were good nurses on the 7th floor, dedicated ones. But Lena was the one they called when the situation stopped being routine. She was the one who stayed calm when the room was falling apart, who knew which doctor to page before the monitors told her to, who could look at a patient's face and understand something the numbers had not yet confirmed. She had built that reputation the way she had built everything in her life, quietly, deliberately, with no assistance from anyone, and no shortcuts taken. Nursing school at 22, paid for by 2 part-time jobs and a financial aid application she had filled out herself on a library computer. Night shifts through her mid-20s while other people her age were discovering themselves at weekend parties. 6 years on this floor, 12-hour shifts, the kind of work that lived in your feet and your lower back, and the particular hollowness behind your eyes at 3 a.m. She didn't talk about where she came from, not with her colleagues, not with the physicians who relied on her, not with the hospital chief who smiled at her during staff appreciation events and had no idea what her last name meant beyond the badge. The badge. It read, L. Vasquez, RN. Just that. She kept it tucked inward against her chest whenever she wasn't actively using it. Old habit, older instinct, the kind that forms in childhood and calcifies into something you do without thinking. The Vasquez name in this city was not a hospital badge kind of name. It was the kind of name that moved through certain rooms, like a change in air pressure. The kind that made men who were accustomed to speaking freely suddenly choose their words more carefully. The kind that opened doors no amount of money could purchase and closed others just as decisively. Her brother Dante had built that, piece by deliberate piece, over a decade, in rooms Lena had never visited and never asked about. She had made her choice at 22. Her world was this: white corridors and vital signs, and the particular satisfaction of watching someone leave this floor alive who had arrived here barely holding on. She had drawn a clean line between herself and everything that came before, and she had kept it clean for 12 years. Dante respected it. He had always respected it. She kept his number saved in her phone under a single letter, D. She had not dialed it in 3 years. She did not intend to. She pressed one hand to the small of her back, reached for a chart with the other, and moved down the corridor. Room 9 needed a medication check. Room 12 needed updated vitals. Room 15 held Mr. Farouk, 71 years old, post-surgical, stubborn as a locked door, with eyes that still held a dry, determined humor, despite everything his body had recently put him through. He needed someone to sit beside him for 4 minutes and not flinch at the numbers on his monitor. Lena was good at all of it. She was always good at all of it. Her daughter shifted inside her, a slow, unhurried roll, the kind of movement that had become, over these months, its own form of language. Certain, reassuring, still here, still okay. Lena touched her stomach without thinking, a reflex now, like checking a pulse. Then she straightened, tucked her badge back against her chest and kept moving. She had 2 hours left on a shift that would not wait for her feelings about it. At 11:47 p.m., the elevator at the far end of the corridor opened. Lena didn't look up. She was in the middle of a medication note, and medication notes required the kind of focused, uninterrupted attention that admitted no distractions. Decimal points misread, dosages miscalculated. These were not small errors. They were the kind that changed lives, and not in the direction anyone wanted. She heard him before she registered what he was. It was not the sound of someone in distress. She was tuned for that frequency and could detect it from 3 rooms away. This was something different. The sound of a man whose entire relationship with the world rested on the assumption that it would arrange itself around his comfort. I don't care what floor this is. I was told this hospital has the best recovery facilities, and I intend to use them tonight. She looked up. 4 men had stepped off the elevator. 3 of them moved with the particular practiced stillness of men who were paid to position themselves between their employer and the word no. They were not hospital security. They did not have the energy of family. They had the energy of consequence, quiet, professional, and absolute. The 4th man stood at the center of all of it. Rowan Ashford. She knew the name the way everyone in the city knew it. Not personally, atmospherically, the way you know the name of a weather pattern without ever having met the wind. Ashford Capital, the new oncology research wing 2 floors below, bore his family name in brushed steel letters that caught the morning light. His photograph appeared in the business section with the regularity of a man who found that arrangement entirely fitting. 45 years old, a suit that had been made specifically for his measurements by someone who charged more for that service than most people made in a month. The kind of handsome that comes not from nature but from never having been genuinely humbled by anything. He was speaking to Marcus, the night intake coordinator. Marcus had 17 years of experience on this floor, and a temperament that could absorb most things without cracking. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "this is the surgical recovery ward. All current rooms are occupied by post-operative patients who require continuous." "I'm not asking about current. I am asking about possible. There is a difference, and I suggest you find it quickly." Lena set down her chart. She walked toward them the way she always moved when something was about to fracture, evenly, without performance, with the complete, settled weight of someone who has handled worse than this and come out the other side still standing. "Mr. Ashford." Her voice was the voice she used for rooms that needed steadying. "I'm Lena Vasquez, senior recovery nurse on this floor tonight. Can you tell me the nature of your procedure today and what monitoring your physician recommended?" He turned, and in the space of approximately 2 seconds, she watched him assess her. The badge, the belly, the scrubs, the conclusion, delivered through his expression with the efficiency of a man who had made this kind of calculation many times before, that she was not the relevant person in this hallway. "I'd prefer to speak with a physician," he said. "There is a physician on call," Lena replied. "I can page him. That will take approximately 12 minutes. In the meantime, I can determine whether this floor is even the appropriate placement for what you need, which will save us both considerable time." "What was the procedure?" A pause. Something moved behind his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but the first reluctant flicker of recognition that she was not going to become smaller simply because he found her size inconvenient. "Cardiac catheterization," he said. "Diagnostic. My physician recommended overnight monitoring given my cardiac history." "And that history includes?" "That is between me and my physician." "And your nurse," she said without inflection, "if you want the appropriate care." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. If you are watching this right now, and you are thinking about someone in your life who carries everything without complaint, who shows up every single day without recognition, someone who deserves so much more than they have been given, I want you to share this video for them right now. Send it to them directly. Let them know that someone sees them. And if this story is already getting under your skin, hit that like button and let the algorithm know this is exactly the kind of story people need to find. She had him settled in the monitoring room by 12:15 a.m., not the private suite. That room held a 29-year-old woman named Dara, who had gone into emergency valve replacement surgery 3 days ago and had not yet stabilized to the point where moving her was anything other than dangerous. Lena had been monitoring Dara's progress since the beginning of the shift. She was not going to move her. Rowan Ashford was given a properly equipped private monitoring room with every clinical tool his situation required. It had a window. It had a chair. It had equipment that was, by any reasonable measure, excellent. He did not receive it as excellent. For the first 40 minutes after settling in, he made his displeasure known in the particular way that men of his specific disposition do. Not through explosion, but through the grinding, consistent pressure of someone who has learned that sustained dissatisfaction is more effective than a single outburst. "This lighting is too bright. It makes it impossible to rest." "I can adjust the overhead light and leave the monitoring panel active," Lena said. She did it. "That equipment is too loud. That beeping is incessant. The cardiac monitor needs to remain active and audible for your safety. I can lower the secondary alert tone." She lowered it. "I want still water." "Not whatever that is." "I'll have someone bring still water." She made a note and passed it to the aide, and then, at 1:10 a.m., he looked at her with an expression that had moved past irritation into something more calculated, and he said, "Is it standard practice here to assign a nurse who is this far along in her pregnancy to overnight monitoring shifts? I am only asking because it seems like a significant liability question." The room held the question like a container holds something under pressure. Lena looked at him steadily. "I am fully capable of performing every function my role requires," she said, "and I have been for the duration of my pregnancy. Is there a clinical concern I can address?" He said nothing, but his expression said enough. She finished her documentation and left the room. Out in the corridor, she exhaled once, slowly, put her hand on the wall for just a moment, just a breath, and then straightened and moved on to room 9, because that was what you did. You kept moving. At 1:23 a.m., she heard a voice she recognized from 2 hallways away, and the temperature of it stopped her mid-step. Rowan's voice, sharper now, stripped of the veneer of patience. "This is completely unacceptable. I want her removed from my care immediately. I want someone else, anyone else, assigned to this room." Lena turned the corner. At the end of the corridor, Priya stood outside Rowan's monitoring room with a medication tray in her hands and tears assembling quietly behind her eyes. Priya was 26 years old, 4 months on the job, still in the phase of her career where she absorbed cruelty as though it were her own fault for inviting it. Rowan stood in the doorway, pointing down the corridor, his posture a masterclass in the particular arrogance of a man who had never once been required to account for his tone. "She told me I could not connect my phone charger to the wall outlet," he said. "I do not take instructions about my own personal property from trainees." Lena walked forward, even, unhurried. "Mr. Ashford." He turned. She stopped in the middle of the corridor and looked at him directly. "The outlet restriction is a hospital protocol related to electromagnetic interference with cardiac monitoring equipment," she said. "Priya communicated that policy correctly. If you have a concern about the policy itself, that is a conversation for hospital administration during business hours. Tonight, on this floor, the protocol stands." He looked at her for a moment that stretched itself out, and then his voice dropped, not louder, lower, the kind of quiet that is designed to be more cutting than volume. Do you know how much money I have given to this hospital? Do you have any concept of what my name on that wing 2 floors below us actually means for the budget of this entire institution?" "I do," Lena said. "Then you understand," he said, "that when I have a request in this building, the appropriate response is not a lecture from someone who can barely—" He paused. His eyes moved to her stomach. Deliberately. The pause was deliberate. What followed was deliberate. "Who can barely manage herself." Priya made a small, involuntary sound. The medication tray trembled in her hands. Lena felt the words land. She felt the shape of them. She felt exactly where they were aimed and what they were designed to find. She had been prepared for impatience, for condescension, for the ordinary arrogance of wealth-performing authority. She had not been prepared for this, for the specific, practiced cruelty of a man who knew exactly where a woman was soft and pressed there without hesitation. And then he reached past her, dismissively, the way you reach past a coat rack. His hand went for the chart she was holding, to pull it from her grip with the absolute assumption that she would simply open her fingers and let it go, because women like her had always let things go for men like him, and he had simply never encountered the exception. His hand closed around her wrist instead, not tightly, not violently, just certainly, the certainty of a man who had never considered resistance. The corridor went silent, not the ordinary silence of a late-night ward, the silence of something so fundamentally wrong that the air itself suspended its movement. Dr. Osei, halfway to room 15, stopped walking. The overnight aide at the far station looked up. Priya did not move. Nobody moved. Because nobody hits a pregnant nurse in a hospital corridor. Nobody grabs her. Nobody does that. And yet his hand was there, and the chart was between them, and he was waiting for her to yield. She did not yield. She looked down at his hand. 1 second, 2, then she looked up at his face. "Let go," she said. No volume, no trembling. Just 2 words, with the full and settled weight of everything she had built, everything she had sacrificed, every shift she had worked, and every moment she had held this floor together behind them. He let go. He recalibrated. She could see it happening, the quick, practiced restructuring of a man reverting to his default position after being briefly displaced from it. "I would like to speak to whoever is in charge of this floor," he said. "That's me," she said. "Then I would like to speak to whoever is in charge of you." She said nothing. She turned to Priya. "Finish the medication round. I will be in room 3 if you need me." And she walked away, with every piece of composure she had remaining, which was still, even then, more than most people carry into their best moments. At 2:15 a.m., Lena sat in the break room with a cup of tea she was not drinking. The room was small and overlit. A table, 4 chairs, a window that showed nothing but the reflection of the room itself. She sat with her hands around the cup and her phone face down on the table beside her, and she thought about the particular cost of composure. How much it took, where it came from, whether it was infinite, or whether there was a point at which even the most carefully maintained composure simply ran out of supply. Her daughter moved, slow and rolling, the underwater certainty of someone who had no awareness yet of anything outside that small, warm world. Still here, still okay. Lena looked at the phone. She turned it over. The screen showed the time and nothing else. She opened her contacts, scrolled to the single letter, D. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she put the phone back down, face down, on the table. This was her world. She had built it. She had kept the 2 things separate for 12 years with the same careful discipline she applied to everything else in her life. And she was not going to let one man's cruelty be the thing that collapsed that boundary. She stood, adjusted her scrubs, pressed her hand once to her stomach. "We're okay," she said quietly, to her daughter, to herself, to the room. She picked up her cup, poured the cold tea down the sink, and went back to her floor. What she did not know, and would not know until later, was that Priya was still at the nursing station. Priya, who was 26 years old and 4 months into her career, and had spent the last 40 minutes trying to understand what it meant that the most capable, most dignified person she had ever worked alongside had just been grabbed by the wrist in a public corridor, and nobody had done anything about it. Priya, who had been sitting with her phone in her lap for 20 minutes. Priya, who had remembered something from 3 months ago. A night when Lena had left her phone unlocked on the break room table for 4 minutes, and Priya had glanced at the screen while reaching past it for her own water bottle and seen the open contacts list and seen a single letter at the top and filed it away in the back of her memory the way you file things you genuinely hope you will never need. She looked at the nursing station entrance. Empty. She looked back at her phone. She dialed. 2 rings. Then a voice, not sleepy, alert, as though the call had not interrupted rest, but simply reached someone who was already awake, already present, already paying attention in the way that certain people always are. Yes, the voice said. Priya exhaled. My name is Priya, she said. I work with your sister. I think something happened tonight that you should know about. A silence, not empty, full. Tell me, the voice said. On the 7th floor, in the corridor outside room 3, Lena checked Mr. Farouk's chart and touched her daughter's movement with one absent hand and had no idea that anything had changed. If this story is moving you right now, if you feel something watching this, I want you to subscribe to Mr. David Love Stories right now. Every single week we bring you stories exactly like this one. Stories about dignity, about strength, about the moments that reveal who we really are. Subscribe so you never miss one. The best is still coming. At 2:48 a.m., the doors to the 7th floor opened. Lena heard it from the far end of the corridor. Not an alarm, not urgency, something else entirely. A quality of changed atmosphere, the way a room shifts when something significant has entered it and not yet announced itself. She looked up from the chart station. A man had come through the doors. No entourage, no announcement. Dark clothing, simple, unremarkable to anyone who did not know what they were looking at. He was perhaps 40, with a face that gave away nothing and absorbed everything simultaneously. He moved with the particular unhurried certainty of someone who had never needed to hurry, because things had always, eventually, arrived where he directed them. The overnight staff at the nursing station went quiet in the way that people go quiet when something enters a space that they cannot properly categorize. Not threatening, exactly, just significant, in a way that their training had not prepared them to name. The man's eyes moved down the corridor, past the night aide, past Dr. Osei, who had paused mid-step without quite knowing why, past the monitoring station, past 3 nurses who found suddenly that they needed to look at their clipboards, and then his gaze found Lena at the far end of the corridor, and it stayed there. Lena, he said, just her name, in the voice she had grown up with, the voice that had once narrated the world to her when she was small enough to need that, the voice she had carried inside herself through nursing school and night shifts and a marriage that dissolved and 6 years on a floor that demanded everything, kept in a place she did not visit often because visiting it made the boundary feel thinner than she needed it to be. Dante, she said. They looked at each other across the length of the corridor. 12 years of deliberate distance, condensed into a single fluorescent-lit hallway at 2:48 in the morning. He walked toward her, unhurried, taking in the floor as he moved, reading it the way she read vital signs, the positions of people, the texture of the silence, the particular quality of a space that had recently held something wrong. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at her, really looked, the way only someone who has known you since before you knew yourself can look. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine, she said. You didn't need to come. Priya seemed to think otherwise. She did not look toward the nursing station, but she was aware of it, aware of a 26-year-old who had done something that was either the most loyal or the most complicated thing anyone had done for her in years. She had not yet decided which. Priya is learning, Lena said. This was mine to handle. Some situations, Dante said quietly, don't know whose they are yet. That's not weakness. That's just how some nights go. She looked at him. He had not changed in 3 years in any way that she could immediately locate. Same eyes, same economy of expression, the same quality of complete attention that had always made her feel, when she was a child, that whatever she was saying was the most important thing happening in the world at that moment. Don't, she said. He was looking past her, down the corridor. His eyes had found the monitoring room at the far end. I'm just going to introduce myself, he said. The way he said it was almost gentle. Dante. Her voice held a warning she wasn't sure she had the authority to enforce. He looked back at her, something in his expression that was not quite a smile but occupied the same neighborhood. I'm going to introduce myself, he said again. and we are going to have a conversation. That is all." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she exhaled, and she followed him, because that was the only thing left to do. Dante opened the door to the monitoring room, without knocking. Rowan Ashford looked up from his phone with the expression of a man who had already exceeded his threshold for the night's interruptions by a considerable margin. His lips were parting around whatever sentence he had prepared for the intrusion, and then he saw Dante's face. The sentence did not arrive. Something happened in Rowan Ashford's expression that Lena, in 6 years of reading the faces of people in crisis, had never quite seen on a man of his particular type. It was not fear, precisely. It was more structural than that. It was the expression of a man who has been standing on a floor he believed was solid, and has felt it, suddenly and without warning, shift beneath him. Dante stood in the doorway. He did not fill it dramatically. He simply occupied it, the way certain people occupy any space they enter, completely, without effort, without announcement. "I don't believe we've met," Dante said. "No," Rowan said. His voice had changed, lower, careful. "My name is Dante Vasquez." He paused for exactly the right amount of time. Lena's brother. The silence that followed was extraordinary. Lena had heard many kinds of silence in this building. The silence after a monitor, flatlined. The silence before a family received information they could not survive unchanged. The silence of a room in which something irreversible has just occurred. This silence was its own category. It was the silence of a man rapidly, involuntarily reviewing every word he had spoken in the last 3 hours and arriving at conclusions that did not reflect on him well by any measure he had ever applied to anything. Rowan opened his mouth. He started. He stopped. He looked at Lena, briefly, with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then he looked back at Dante. "I wasn't aware that she was..." "That she was what?" Dante asked, quietly, without edge, without any particular emphasis or inflection. Just the question, sitting in the room, requiring an answer that Rowan Ashford did not have a clean version of, because every version of the sentence that began with, "I wasn't aware that she was," ended with something that described only what Rowan Ashford had assumed. And every one of those assumptions, laid out plainly in the fluorescent light of a hospital monitoring room at 3 a.m., was its own indictment. "I understand you had some concerns about the care on this floor tonight," Dante said, pleasantly, with the absolute settled courtesy of a man who did not need to raise his voice to make a room feel smaller. "I hope they've been addressed to your satisfaction." Rowan sat in his hospital bed with his cardiac leads and his IV line, and the readout of his own heartbeat moving steadily across the monitor behind him, and he understood, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, what it felt like to be the least powerful person in a room. "I owe her an apology," he said, quietly. It was the only sentence available to him that was not a lie. "Yes," Dante said. "You do." He did not add anything to that. He did not need to. He let the statement stand in the room and be exactly what it was. Not a threat, not a victory, not a performance. Just the truth, simply stated, by a man who had learned long ago that the truth, delivered with certainty, required no embellishment. He looked at Rowan for a moment longer. Then he looked at Lena, and something passed between them in that look. 12 years, a boundary, a sacrifice, a choice, and the complicated grace of someone who had honored that choice by waiting until he was needed. Then he stepped back, and he waited in the corridor. At 4 a.m., Lena stood outside room 3. The corridor was quiet in the particular way that very late nights in hospitals become quiet. Not empty, but settled. The machines continued their conversations with each other. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor offered its steady reassurance. Mr. Farouk, in room 15, was sleeping with the deliberate stubbornness of a man who had decided he was going to recover and was not interested in arguments about it. Lena stood with her arms loose at her sides and her back aching, and her daughter moving with that unhurried, certain roll that had become the most reliable thing in her days. She heard the door open behind her. Rowan Ashford stepped into the corridor. Hospital gown, 4-pole, whatever remained of his composure, carried now with considerably more awareness of its weight than it had been hours ago. He looked, without all his architecture of authority, like a man in his mid-40s who had recently discovered something about himself that he had preferred not to know. He stopped a few feet from her. "Miss Vasquez," he said. She looked at him. He held her gaze. Did not look away. I owe you an apology, he said. Not because of who your brother is. I need you to understand that. Because if I am apologizing because of who your brother is, then I have learned nothing tonight, and the apology is worthless. He paused. I am sorry because of who you are, because you have been on this floor for 12 hours carrying a child and doing work that most people would not have the competence or the character to do, and I walked in here and looked at you and saw none of that. I saw what I wanted to see, which was someone I could dismiss, and then I used words that were designed to hurt you, and I put my hand on you. He stopped. That was wrong. All of it was wrong. And I am aware that an apology at 4 a.m. in a hospital corridor does not undo any of it, but I am offering it anyway because it is the only honest thing I have left to give tonight. Lena listened to every word. She received the apology the way a person who has learned to protect themselves receives something genuine, carefully, with full attention, without rushing toward either acceptance or dismissal. Thank you, she said, and she meant it. Not as forgiveness, not as absolution, but as acknowledgement. He had said something true. She had heard it. Your overnight monitoring levels are worth watching, she said then. I'll have Dr. Osei do a full review at 6 a.m. before the day shift comes on. You should try to sleep. He nodded. Slowly. The woman in room 12, he said, the one you wouldn't move. Lena looked at him. Is she going to be all right? A small pause. We're doing everything we can for her, Lena said. She has a good team. He nodded again. He turned to go back to his room. Then he stopped. The nurse, he said. The young one, Priya. Yes. She did the right thing, calling him, whatever it cost her to do that. That was the right thing. He went back through his door. Lena stood in the corridor for a moment. Just a moment. Her hand went to her stomach, reflexively, finding the movement there that was always waiting for her. Certain, unhurried. Still here. At the far end of the corridor, Dante stood near the elevator doors. He had his hands in his pockets. He was watching her with the patient, familiar attention of someone who had been watching over her since before she knew what that meant. He would not stay. They both knew that. The two worlds had touched tonight, briefly, necessarily, and now they would return to their proper distance. She had built something here. He had built something there. And the space between those two things was what had kept both of them intact. She looked at him, across the length of the corridor. He raised one hand, slightly, the gesture of someone saying something that does not require words. She nodded. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped in, and then he was gone. And Lena Vasquez straightened her back, tucked her badge inward against her chest, and walked toward room 9 for the final medication check of her shift. 1 hour left. She had work to do. Here is what Rowan Ashford learned at 4 a.m. in a hospital corridor, in a hospital gown, talking to a woman who had every reason to walk away from him and chose instead to do her job. He learned that power without empathy is just noise. It is loud, and it moves through rooms, and it makes people flinch and fall quiet and step aside. But at the end of the night, in the quiet of a monitoring room with your own heartbeat on a screen behind you, it is the most hollow thing a person can own. He learned that you cannot judge the weight a person carries by looking at them. Lena Vasquez stood in a corridor carrying 12 hours of work, 8 months of pregnancy, 6 years of sacrifice, 12 years of deliberate separation from everything that could have made her life easier, and the full living weight of a daughter who was depending on her to keep moving. None of that was visible on the outside. None of it was announced, and he had looked at her and seen nothing worth his attention. He learned, too late but not too finally, that the people who hold everything together are almost always the people the world overlooks most aggressively. The nurses at 3 a.m. The quiet ones. The ones who tuck their badges inward and keep moving and do not ask for recognition because they have long since learned not to wait for it. And maybe the most important thing of all, the thing that does not belong only to Rowan Ashford, but to every one of us who has moved through the world making fast, careless calculations about who matters in a given room. The dignity a person carries is not given to them by the people who respect them. It is what they hold on to when someone doesn't. It belongs entirely to the person carrying it, and no one, not money, not authority, not the cruelty of a bad moment in a long night, can take it from them without their permission. Lena never gave permission, and that, in the end, is the whole story. If this story reached something inside you today, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me who the Lena is in your life. The person who shows up every single day, who carries more than anyone knows, who deserves to be seen. Let's celebrate them together, right here, right now. And if you are watching this, and you needed to hear this today, if something in Lena's story felt familiar, felt true, felt like something you have lived yourself, share this video. Send it to someone who needs it. Because the most powerful thing we can do for each other is make sure the right stories find the right people. Like this video, if it moved you. Subscribe to Mr. David Love Stories so you never miss what's coming next. Because next week, we have something waiting for you that will make tonight feel like just the beginning. We will see you then. And until we do, keep going. Keep holding your badge close. And never, ever let anyone make you smaller than you are.